The morning Daniel Harper left his son at the bus stop, the sky was painfully clear, almost cruel in its brightness. There was no storm to blame, no emergency siren in the distance, no dramatic excuse to soften what he was about to do. 7-year-old Caleb sat in his wheelchair, a faded rocket backpack hanging from his shoulders, his fragile legs covered with a thin blue blanket against the morning chill. Daniel kept checking his watch instead of looking at his son. 8:12 a.m., the special needs transport bus was late again. Cars passed in a steady rhythm, parents dropping off children before heading to work. Caleb tilted his head up, smiling with innocent patience. "Dad, will you come to school later?" he asked softly, his voice full of trust. "Maybe, buddy. If I'm not busy," Daniel replied, forcing a smile that never reached his tired eyes. Busy had become his shield against everything he couldn't handle. Busy with hospital bills, busy with overdue rent, busy with the crushing exhaustion of raising a disabled child alone since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. The bus still didn't come. 8:20. 8:27. Daniel's phone buzzed with another payment reminder, the screen lighting up with numbers he could no longer ignore. Caleb looked down the empty road and then back at his father. "Is the bus broken?" he asked, trying to stay cheerful, trying to stay brave in ways no 7-year-old should have to. Daniel felt something heavy pressing against his chest. Love for his son was still there, but it was buried under fear, debt, the constant ache of watching Caleb struggle to move without pain. Every therapy session cost more than he earned in a week. Every doctor's visit reminded him that his son's condition would only get worse. Then his phone rang again. His boss. "You've missed too many shifts, Daniel," the harsh voice warned. "If you're not here in 30 minutes, don't bother coming back." Daniel stared at Caleb's small hands gripping the wheels of his chair. Losing his job meant losing everything. Keeping it meant leaving something behind. "Dad," Caleb said suddenly, eyes shining with hope, "when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house. One with ramps everywhere so I can race you." The words pierced Daniel's heart, but instead of saving him, they terrified him. Caleb believed in a future Daniel could barely imagine surviving. Daniel knelt down and adjusted the blanket around Caleb's legs, buying himself a few more seconds. "I need to go handle something important," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "You'll come back?" Caleb asked immediately. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, buddy, I'll come back." The lie felt heavier than anything he had ever said. He stood up before he could change his mind. Each step toward his car felt like walking through water. He didn't allow himself to look back as he started the engine and drove away. In the rearview mirror, Caleb remained small but visible, waiting with patient faith that only a child could possess. 10 minutes later, a black luxury sedan slowed near the curb. Inside sat Victor Langston, a self-made millionaire known for ruthless business decisions and flawless timing. He had watched the father leave. He had watched the child remain. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, he stepped out of his car, approached the boy, and knelt beside him. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked gently. Caleb smiled. "My dad. He always comes back." Victor's expression changed. For the first time in years, he felt something stronger than ambition. He felt responsibility. Victor Langston did not immediately ask where Caleb's father had gone. Instead, he removed his suit jacket and carefully draped it over the boy's shoulders, noticing how thin the blanket really was. Up close, he could see the faint tremor in Caleb's hands and the quiet effort it took for him to sit upright. "The bus is late," Caleb explained politely, as if apologizing for the inconvenience. Victor glanced down the empty road, then back at the child. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked gently. Caleb shrugged. "Not long. Dad had to leave for work. He'll come back." The certainty in his voice was unshaken, and that certainty struck Victor harder than any accusation ever could. He had built an empire by recognizing opportunity, but this was not opportunity. This was abandonment. "Do you know your home address?" Victor asked carefully. Caleb nodded and pointed down the street. "Third building after the red mailbox. Apartment to be." The door studied him for a moment, weighing his options. He could call the police, could report the father. But something told him this situation was deeper than cruelty alone. "Tell you what," Victor said softly. "Why don't we wait together a few minutes more?" Caleb smiled brightly, grateful for the company. They sat in silence as cars continued to pass. Some drivers slowed slightly, curious about the well-dressed man beside the disabled child, but none stopped. Victor felt a strange tightening in his chest, something unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable. 20 minutes passed. The bus never came. Victor checked his watch and made a decision. "Caleb, I'm going to call the school and check about the bus, all right?" Caleb nodded obediently. Victor stepped aside and dialed the number printed on the child's backpack tag. Within minutes, he learned the transport bus had broken down and parents had been notified, except no one had answered Daniel Harper's phone. Victor returned to Caleb, who was now shivering slightly despite the sunlight. "Looks like the bus won't be coming today," Victor explained gently. Caleb's smile faded for the first time. "That's okay. Dad will come back." The words were quieter now, less certain. Victor crouched again, lowering his voice. "Caleb, would it be all right if I took you somewhere warm while we wait?" he asked. The boy hesitated, thinking carefully. "Dad says not to go with strangers." Victor nodded approvingly. "Your dad is right. That's smart." He pulled out his phone and turned on the camera. "Let's take a picture together and send it to him so he knows exactly where you are." Caleb considered this, then agreed. Victor snapped the photo and texted it to Daniel's number with a simple message. "Your son is safe. Call me immediately." He added his business card beneath the photo, before placing the phone back in his pocket. "Now," he said warmly, "how about some hot chocolate?" Victor carefully lifted Caleb into the back seat of his sedan, securing the wheelchair in the trunk with surprising gentleness. As he drove toward a nearby cafe, he couldn't stop thinking about his own childhood. His father had left too, though not at a bus stop. He had left through silence, through absence, through years of choosing work over family. Inside the cafe, Caleb wrapped both hands around the warm cup, eyes lighting up. "You're nice," he said simply. Victor looked at him for a long moment. He had been called many things in his life: brilliant, ruthless, intimidating, but never nice. The word unsettled him more than any insult ever had. An hour later, Daniel Harper's phone finally rang. He had just stepped out of his supervisor's office, newly unemployed, anger boiling in his veins. When he saw the unknown number and the photo attached, his blood ran cold. Son, sitting beside a stranger in an expensive suit, and beneath it, a single message. Daniel's hands trembled as he stared at the photo on his phone. Caleb sat inside a cafe, wrapped in an expensive suit jacket, holding a cup of hot chocolate with a small smile on his face. Beside him was the silver-haired stranger, calm and composed. Beneath the image were just 4 words: "Your son is safe." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. Panic hit him first, then guilt, then something darker, fear of consequences. He had only meant to step away for a short time, just long enough to keep his job, but now his son was sitting with a stranger, and Daniel had no control over the situation. He immediately called the number attached to the message. The call was answered after 1 ring. "Mr. Harper," a calm voice said, steady and firm. "My name is Victor Langston. Your son is with me at Brookside Caf on Main Street. He is safe, warm, and waiting for you." Daniel didn't respond. He was already running toward his car. The drive felt endless. Every red light was torture. Every passing minute made his mistake feel larger. He tried convincing himself he hadn't truly abandoned Caleb. He had planned to come back. He had just needed time. Deep down, he knew that leaving Evan for a moment had crossed a line he couldn't ignore. When Daniel finally pushed through the cafe doors, his eyes scanned the room desperately. Caleb spotted him first. "Dad." He shouted happily, waving as if nothing unusual had happened. That pure joy broke something inside Daniel. He rushed forward, lifting his son and holding him tightly. "I told Mr. Victor you'd come back," Caleb said proudly, sipping the last of his hot chocolate. Daniel looked over his son's shoulder and met Victor's steady gaze. There was no anger there, no accusations, just observation. That calmness made Daniel more uncomfortable than shouting ever could. "You left him alone," Victor said quietly, once Caleb settled back in his chair. It wasn't a question. It wasn't loud. It was simply truth. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "You don't know anything about my life?" he replied defensively, though his voice lacked strength. "You're right," Victor answered evenly. "So tell me." The invitation caught Daniel off guard. He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "My wife died 3 years ago. Medical bills swallowed everything. I'm behind on rent. If I lose my job, we lose our apartment. The bus didn't come. My boss threatened to fire me." Victor listened without interrupting. Daniel continued, his voice rough. I just needed 30 minutes. Thought he'd be fine. Even as he said it, the words sounded weak. He glanced at Caleb, who was quietly drawing shapes on a napkin, unaware of how close his world had come to breaking. I watched you drive away, Victor said after a pause. You didn't look careless. You looked defeated. That single word pierced Daniel deeper than any insult could have. Defeated? He had been so focused on surviving that he had started making decisions from fear instead of love. Caleb looked up suddenly. Dad, Mr. Victor said. I'm brave, he said with a small grin. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. Brave. His son faced pain every day without complaint. Yet Daniel had nearly let pressure convince him he was alone in the fight. He had underestimated the strength sitting right beside him. Victor stood and adjusted his jacket. Come to my office tomorrow morning, he said, handing Daniel a business card. The name printed on it made Daniel freeze Victor Langston Holdings. Bring Caleb. I believe this situation deserves more than judgment. Sometimes, Victor added thoughtfully, a single moment reveals what a man truly needs. The next morning, Daniel stood outside Langston Holdings Tower, feeling completely out of place. The glass building rose above downtown like something from another world, reflecting the sunlight in sharp silver lines. Caleb sat beside him in his wheelchair, wearing his cleanest shirt, unaware of how much his father's heart was pounding. Inside, the lobby was silent and polished, floors gleaming like mirrors. A receptionist greeted them by name, which only made Daniel more nervous. They were escorted to a private elevator and taken to the top floor. Caleb looked around with wide eyes. Dad, this place is huge, he whispered. Daniel could only nod. Victor Langston was waiting in a spacious office overlooking the city skyline. He wasn't behind a desk this time. Instead, he stood by the window, hands folded behind his back. When he turned and saw Caleb, his expression softened immediately. Good morning, young man, he said warmly. Caleb smiled. Hi, Mr. Victor. Daniel noticed something different about his son. He seemed confident, almost comfortable. Victor gestured for them to sit. I didn't call you here to embarrass you, he began calmly. And I didn't call social services. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly. Why did you call us? Daniel asked cautiously. Victor stepped closer. Because I recognize exhaustion when I see it, he replied. I built my empire from nothing. I know what desperation feels like. But there's a difference between being overwhelmed and giving up. The words were firm but not cruel. Daniel looked down. I didn't give up, he said quietly. I just lost perspective. Victor nodded slowly. Exactly. And that's what we're going to fix. He pressed a button on his desk, and a woman entered with a folder. She handed it to Daniel before leaving silently. Inside were documents, medical assistance approvals, a fully covered therapy program for Caleb at one of the best pediatric facilities in the state, and something else. Employment papers. Daniel's eyes widened as he read the position title. Facilities Operations Supervisor, Langston Holdings. I don't understand, Daniel whispered. Victor sat across from him. Your previous employer called this morning, he said evenly. You were fired yesterday for leaving your shift. I made a call, and that position is now open here. Better salary, flexible hours, full health benefits. Daniel felt overwhelmed. Why would you do this for me? He asked honestly. Victor looked at Caleb, who was spinning one of the office chairs slowly with quiet amusement. Because yesterday I saw something rare, Victor answered. A father who made a terrible decision, but for the wrong reasons, not the wrong heart. Caleb suddenly spoke up. Dad cried last night, he said innocently. Daniel froze in embarrassment, but Victor didn't laugh, simply nodded. Good, Victor said softly. Men who can still cry haven't lost themselves. The room fell quiet. Victor leaned forward slightly. But understand this clearly, Daniel. I'm not rescuing you. I'm investing in you. There's a difference. You'll work hard. You'll show up. And you'll never again leave your son alone because you feel powerless. Daniel nodded firmly, something steady returning to his posture. Tears filled his eyes, but this time they weren't from defeat. They were from relief. Thank you, he said simply. Caleb reached for his father's hand and squeezed it. See, Dad? I told you everything would be okay, he whispered proudly. 6 months later, Caleb's therapy had strengthened his arm significantly. and Daniel had become one of the most reliable supervisors at Langston Holdings. One afternoon, as they left the office together, Caleb looked up and asked, "Dad, are you still defeated?" Daniel smiled down at his son. "No, buddy," he said softly. "I'm learning how to stand again."